Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are opening up this really fascinating stack of sources.
Yeah, it's a wild ride.
It really is. It centers around this intensely raw audio recording in a memoir, documenting one man's journey, starting in the really adrenaline-fueled, chaotic nightlife of London.
Right.
And it crashes straight into a profound internal breakdown, and then ultimately arrives at this radical new framework for human mental health.
It's honestly a phenomenal look at the mechanics of the human mind.
Hmm.
The sources give us this granular step-by-step account of how we trap ourselves in identities that, actively suppress our true internal state.
Yeah.
And what it physically feels like when that facade just completely shatters.
Exactly. So the mission for you listening today is to explore this trajectory. We're going to look at what happens when you build your entire personality around, handling chaos,
Mm-hmm.
the terrifying reality of an internal psychological break, and how true peace isn't something you can actively chase. It's simply what remains when you finally stop running.
I love that framing.
Right. To frame this, think about playing a high-stakes video game. You're constantly leveling up, right? You're unlocking heavier armor, acquiring stronger weapons, and to the rest of the players on the server, you look absolutely unstoppable.
You look like the final boss.
Exactly. You are the final boss. But what the other players can't see is that internal health bar hidden way down in the corner of the screen.
Right, so the armor's getting thicker, but that health bar is silently draining to zero.
And that is the core illusion we're dissecting today. Confusing external armor with internal survival. I mean, to understand how the author's internal health bar hit zero, we have to look at how he built that armor in the first place.
Yeah, the buildup is crucial.
It is. The sources start his story in the kitchen of a London venue, but he deliberately moves out of the back of the house. He transitions to the floor and then behind the bar, specifically because he wanted to be closer to the noise, closer to the edge.
And that edge is really the defining characteristic of the London nightlife environment he describes. It's this highly pressurized, enclosed space running on a volatile mixture of money, alcohol, ego, and just raw, unfiltered emotion.
He writes this incredible line, actually. Alcohol doesn't create problems, it reveals them.
Which is such a brilliant observation of human behavior.
It really is.
Because he watched people arrive at the venue as this one polished version of themselves. And over the course of a few hours, the alcohol would strip that polish away, revealing all these underlying insecurities or aggression or sadness.
Well, yeah.
And when you're working in the absolute center of that volatility, your brain has to adapt. You develop this intense hypervigilance.
Like a survival mechanism.
Exactly. You instinctively know how to read a room without anyone teaching you. You're subconsciously standing for, who's standing too quietly or who's laughing a little too loud.
Or where the energy is certainly pooling, right?
Yes.
The sources detail how this hypervigilance morphed into extreme physical pattern recognition. He wasn't just logically observing the room. His nervous system was reacting before his conscious brain could even catch up.
That's the crazy part.
He describes feeling a literal physical tightness in his chest seconds before a fight broke out on the floor. His body recognized the microscopic energetic shift in the room's tension.
Which, from a biological standpoint, that's a trauma response.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. That is the nervous system flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline to prepare for a threat. But the danger in his specific environment is that this stress response wasn't viewed as a problem.
It was rewarded.
Exactly. It was viewed as a highly lucrative superpower. Because he could anticipate the violence and the chaos, he got more shifts, more trust from the owners, and eventually high-level management roles.
He became known as the guy who handles it. And that label, it wasn't just a job description. It swallowed his entire identity.
It became who he was.
Right. If a situation escalated, he handled it. No hesitation, no visible fear, just control over the room and control over himself.
But we need to look at the mechanics of that control, because it's a biological impossibility to exist in a threat state without experiencing fear or doubt.
So what was he actually doing?
He wasn't controlling his emotions, he was suppressing them. I mean, the role of the guy who handles it doesn't leave any oxygen for vulnerability or exhaustion. Every time he felt a spike of raw emotion that didn't serve his job, he just forced it down into this psychological lockbox.
But the nervous system keeps a ledger.
It always does. Buried emotions don't evaporate, they ferment.
Wow. So going back to our video game analogy, this is where the health bar is flashing red, but he's too busy upgrading his armor to notice. He documents these quiet, isolated moments walking home alone after a brutal shift. The chaotic noise of the club is gone, and instead of relief, he feels this profound, agonizing restlessness.
Right, because his neurological baseline had fundamentally warped. When your brain is subjected to constant high decibel chaos, it calibrates to that chaos.
It becomes the new normal.
Yeah, so in the absence of adrenaline, calm doesn't feel peaceful, it feels dangerous. Silence feels like a threat because it leaves you alone with that ledger of suppressed emotions.
Oh, man. So instead of slowing down to process the restlessness, he just sought out more noise to drown it out. He mistook forward momentum-like, acquiring more money, more status, with actual stability.
And this accelerates into a massive escalation phase. He's managing London-scale venues now, hundreds of people, relentless pressure every single night.
And that biological switch inside his brain that pumps out adrenaline just gets stuck in the on position.
The symptoms he documents here are classic indicators of an impending psychological cliff. He finishes a shift at 3 a.m., but his brain is still firing at 100 miles an hour.
Just racing.
Obsessively replaying conversations from the night, predicting future conflicts for next week. He stops sleeping because sleep feels like a waste of time. And the most insidious part of this phase is that it didn't feel like a breakdown.
It felt like absolute invincibility.
Yes.
He genuinely believed he was operating on a superior cognitive level. He felt faster than his peers, sharper, completely untouchable, like he was seeing the matrix of the nightlife scene.
Because the adrenaline is masking the profound physical and cognitive fatigue. When you're running purely on stress hormones, you feel a false sense of clarity.
And he chased that razor-sharp edge. I mean, friends and colleagues noticed the manic behavior, right? The rapid speech, the erratic jumping between ideas, and they told him to slow down.
But to slow down would mean questioning the reality he'd built. And he refused to do that.
I have to throw a question out to you listening right now, because this dynamic extends way beyond London nightclubs. Look at modern corporate culture.
Oh, 100%.
We actively financially reward the exact manic behaviors that precede a systemic breakdown. If you answer emails at 2 a.m., take on the workload of 3 people and never power down, we label you a hustler or a rock star employee.
We celebrate the pathology right up until the literal moment the person collapses.
It's terrifying.
It's a massive societal blind spot. We reward the suppression of human limits. But biology doesn't care about your job title or your work ethic. You can only borrow against your body's ledger for so long before the system violently reclaims the debt.
Which brings us to the break.
Yeah.
And the sources describe this moment with churring precision. The wall hits, and it does not negotiate. One moment he's sharp, managing the floor, and the next, his cognitive function just shatters.
And the defining characteristic of this break wasn't sadness or depression, it was terrifying velocity.
Velocity.
Yeah, his thoughts became completely uncontrollable, firing over the top of each other with zero space in between. He describes the physical sensation of not being able to grab onto a single thought long enough to finish a sentence.
And the specific nature of his fear here is fascinating. He spent years staring down physical threats, breaking up fights between violent people. But this wasn't an external threat. This was the raw, unfiltered terror of losing control of his own mind.
He was trapped inside a machine that was ripping itself apart.
And there was no off switch.
Right, so what does a person whose entire identity is built on handling situations do when their mind breaks?
They try to handle it.
Exactly. He attempted to use his primary survival tool, sheer willpower, to force his brain back into submission. But as he realizes in the memoir, when you declare war on your own mind, you are guaranteed to lose.
The harder he tried to control the panic, the more fractured his reality became. The tragedy here is the death of the identity. The heavy armor he spent years building just vaporized.
Gone.
The strong guy, the one who never flinches, the one everyone relies on, is suddenly gone, and he is left staring at a stranger.
He is stripped down to the studs, which is a devastating place to be, but it's also the only condition under which genuine rebuilding can actually occur.
So, stripped of his identity and fundamentally broken, he physically flees the environment. He buys a ticket to Bali. And the memoir is very clear, this was not a curated eat, pray, love spiritual retreat.
No, not at all.
He went to Bali because he was terrified and had literally nowhere else to go.
And the environmental contrast is just jarring. He moves from the dark, high-voltage compression of London to the slow, expansive quiet of Bali.
Which must have been a shock to the system.
A massive shock. We need to be clear about how the human brain processes that kind of sudden shift. The silence did not heal him. Initially, it tortured him.
It makes me think of driving down a chaotic, heavily congested highway. Your car engine starts making this horrendous metallic clanking noise,
Right.
but instead of pulling over to assess the damage, you just crank the radio volume to the absolute maximum so you don't have to hear the engine dying.
Yeah.
Moving to Bali was like finally pulling the car over to the side of the road and turning off the radio.
That's a great analogy. And the terrifying thing about turning off that radio is realizing you now have to open the hood and you have absolutely no idea what you're looking at.
Exactly.
The silence in Bali made his internal noise deafening. Without the external chaos of the nightclub to distract him, all of those suppressed emotions, the fear, the exhaustion, the unprocessed trauma just came flooding to the surface.
So how does he actually survive that flood?
Yeah.
Because the sources show it wasn't through some sudden discovery of Zen meditation.
No.
It was through sheer absolute exhaustion. He was physically and mentally too tired to keep holding the lockbox closed. He stopped running because his legs simply gave out.
And that exhaustion forces a critical transition. He moves from suppression to observation. For his entire adult life, his instinct was to override his internal state. If he felt anxious, he buried it.
But in Bali, he can't.
Right, because he lacks the energy to bury it, he is forced to just sit with it. He starts applying that hyper-vigilant pattern recognition he used in the nightclubs to his own internal nervous system.
He starts watching his own mind. He notices how his physical energy wildly fluctuates. He watches his thoughts accelerate into a blur and then slowly decrescendo.
Just passively observing?
Yeah. And through this passive observation, he hits a profound realization. He writes, "Peace isn't something you chase. It's something that's there when you stop running."
Which completely upends our cultural narrative around mental health. Yeah. We treat peace as a destination, a reward you unlock after you do enough therapy, read enough books, or optimize your morning routine.
Oh, totally. The 5 a.m. ice baths.
Exactly. But his realization is that peace is the default human baseline. It's what naturally reveals itself the moment you drop the heavy armor and stop trying to micromanage every variable of your existence.
Sitting in that stillness, watching his internal engine run without actively trying to strangle it, leads him to a radical confrontation with the medical label he was eventually given.
Right.
He was diagnosed as bipolar.
A diagnosis that typically comes with a very specific narrative, that you have an unpredictable, fundamentally broken chemical disorder that must be rigidly managed and suppressed for the rest of your life.
I have to push back here, though, on behalf of anyone listening who might be skeptical.
Yeah.
Bipolar disorder is a serious, medically documented psychiatric condition. When the author starts framing his manic episodes not as a broken disorder, but as a powerful, uncalibrated system, isn't there a massive danger that he's just romanticizing a chemical imbalance? Isn't he just in denial of his own illness?
That is the exact friction the author wrestles with, and it's such a vital question. He is not denying the severity of the biological chemical shifts, nor is he advocating for the reckless abandonment of medical support.
Okay, so what is the distinction?
What he is fundamentally challenging is the relationship the patient is told to have with their own mind. The standard narrative told him to fear his elevated states, to view them as a hostile takeover by a broken machine.
Right.
But through his observation in Bali, he realized those elevated states when he felt incredibly clear, creative, and perceptive, they didn't feel broken at all. They felt incredibly powerful.
So the energy wasn't the problem.
The problem wasn't the energy itself. The problem was that he had no steering wheel.
Uncalibrated versus broken.
Precisely. Think about a Formula One race car. It isn't a broken Honda Civic. It is a highly sensitive, volatile machine that requires a completely different level of awareness to drive without crashing into a wall.
Wow, yeah.
By observing his mind, he realized his condition wasn't random, unpredictable chaos. It followed a clear, repeatable pattern.
And realizing it's a pattern changes everything. If it's a pattern, it can be mapped. If it can be mapped, it can be directed.
Exactly.
This is how he develops the bipolar aware perspective, which ultimately evolves into a universal framework he calls conscious systems. He maps out a 5-step human operating system that governs how we interact with the world.
And this framework applies to human psychology across the board, diagnosis or no diagnosis.
It's for everyone.
Yeah. The 5 sequential steps are situation, story, emotion, pattern, and choice.
To understand how powerful this is, we can't just list them. We have to look at the invisible friction between these steps.
Absolutely.
Step 1 is the situation. This is the raw, objective reality of what is happening. Let's say you receive a vague 2-sentence email from your boss asking for a meeting. That is the situation.
But the human brain hates ambiguity. So in milliseconds, we jump to step 2, the story. We invent a narrative to explain the situation. You tell yourself, my boss hates my recent project, and I am about to get fired.
Which instantly triggers step 3. Emotion.
Yeah.
Your body reacts to the story as if it's objective truth.
Right.
Your heart rate spikes, your chest tightens, and you're flooded with anxiety.
And this is where the trap snaps shut. Because you are flooded with anxiety, you default to step 4, your pattern.
Your automatic response.
Yeah, your historical ingrained reaction to feeling threatened. Maybe your pattern is to send a defensive, aggressive reply. Maybe your pattern is to completely shut down and ignore the email entirely.
The author's core revelation is that almost every human being walks through life entirely blind to steps 2 and 3. We skip straight from the situation to the pattern.
Boss sends email, I panic and get defensive.
We believe the situation directly caused the reaction, completely unaware that our own internal story manufactured the crisis.
The entire objective of conscious systems is to take that agonizing stillness he learned in Bali and wedge it into the microscopic gap between step 3, the emotion, and step 4, the pattern.
To just pause.
If you can observe the emotion without immediately acting on it, you unlock step 5.
Choice.
Choice. The ability to look at your racing heart and say, I am feeling threatened because of a story I just invented. I do not have to execute my historical pattern of aggression. I can choose a different response.
If you're listening right now, think about your own daily script. When your partner sighs heavily in the kitchen, or when a client pushes back on a deadline, do you skip straight from the situation to your historical pattern?
Most of us do.
How many of your arguments, your anxieties, and your mistakes are just you running an unconscious script because you never paused to question the story your brain just invented?
It is a confronting realization, because if you're not actively pausing to find that choice, you aren't actually living a new day. You're just repeating yesterday's script with different props.
Man. So, after surviving the brutal chaos of the London nightlife, enduring the shattering of his own identity, sitting through the agonizing silence of Bali, and mapping out this new internal framework, what is the ultimate takeaway? Where does the author land on the concept of strength?
He lands on a philosophy he calls still here, and it requires a complete dismantling of what society tells us strength looks like.
How so?
For his entire life, he believed strength was the armor. He thought it was the ability to grit his teeth, bury his fear, and project absolute impenetrable control over his environment.
But the armor was the exact thing that nearly killed him.
Right. True resilience, what still here represents, is the profound courage required to stay present when all of that armor is stripped away. It's the willingness to feel the tightness in your chest or the racing of your thoughts, and instead of fighting it or burying it, simply saying, I see this, it is uncomfortable, but I am still here.
It's realizing that profound life changes don't usually come from massive cinematic pivots.
Yeah.
You don't need to quit your job and move to an island in Indonesia to fix your internal engine.
No, please don't do that.
The change comes from microscopic, quiet decisions. The decision to take a breath before responding to an email. The decision to observe a spike of anger without letting it drive the car.
It is the shift from always hunting for the next distraction to finally being okay with what currently is. Awareness doesn't require force. It only requires honesty.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Yeah.
Think back to that video game analogy and the heavy armor you wear every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the specific part of your personality or your mind that you spend the absolute most energy trying to suppress, manage, or hide from the world. The part you've always been told is a glitch in your system. What if that part isn't a flaw at all? What if, once you finally stop running, pull the car over, and just sit with the engine, it turns out to be your greatest uncalibrated superpower?